My favorite late Zhou artifact would be this. This sword was unearthed in 1965 in Jingzhou, sheathed in an airtight wooden scabbard. This beautiful sword remained untarnished despite being buried in tombs submerged in underground water for more than 2,000 years. For comparison, here is a relatively well-preserved, similarly aged bronze sword, and you can clearly see the difference in preservation. Not only was it untarnished, the edge was still sharp when unearthed, capable of slicing through paper and even accidentally cutting a careless archaeologist. The sword was adorned with perfect rhombic patterns, and on one side of the sword, 8 intricate bird seal script words can be clearly seen. Pay attention to these words. We will come back to it shortly. The beauty of the craftsmanship and the metallurgy know-how involved in the making of this sword is unparalleled. While this is not the oldest sword discovered to date, no other swords from the late Bronze Age survive to this day in anywhere near this perfect state. But this is not the reason why this sword is my favorite artifact from the late Zhou period. The reason has something to do with the man behind the sword. You see, 2 videos ago, I attempted to describe Western society with one word or with one concept. And I chose the word liberty, or the concept of individual autonomy, as the reductive description of the soul at the center of Western civilization. Then I was asked to do the same with Chinese civilization. And as a person brought up in a predominantly Chinese environment, this was not an easy task, as different aspects of my culture, some of which are polar opposites, kept pulling me into different rabbit holes of inquiries. What defined the Chinese at its core? I asked. Eventually, I settled on one concept that seems to tie the contradicting faces of Chinese culture into one. And that is this: perseverance. There are many Chinese idioms imparting the virtues of cultivating perseverance or endurance of great hardship. One that stands out for me is 卧薪尝胆, to sleep on hay and to taste bile. This idiom originates from the records of the Grand Historian by Sima Qian, where it describes the tribulations of King Goujian, the king of the state of Yue, during the spring and autumn period of Zhou dynasty in approximately 495 BC. Despite Yue's geographical location in what is today coastal heart of modern China, with beautiful and prosperous cities like Hangzhou, for example. But 2,500 years ago, Yue was a small kingdom at the edge of the Chinese world, with a small population and an unproductive soil, existing in the shadows of its larger hegemonic neighbors of Chu and Wu to its north. King Goujian inherited the state of Yue with a deep rivalry with the state of Wu that repeatedly bullied and harassed Yue in the hopes of creating a casus belli for an all-out invasion. However, when the opportunity arises, Goujian outmaneuvered the invading Wu army with a considerably smaller forces and mortally wounded the king of Wu, who then passed the throne to his son Fu Chai with an instruction to exact revenge on Yue. Fu Chai would then lead an army to defeat Goujian 3 years later. Through shrewd negotiations and the luck of Wu being preoccupied with the state of Qi to its north, in 492 BC, Goujian managed to secure a term of surrender, whereby Goujian and his wife were to enter into servitude at the court of Fu Chai and ceding a large part of its territory to the state of Wu. While the records of the Grand Historian did not elaborate on Goujian's ordeal as a servant under Wu, other historical records describe Goujian as enduring great humiliation of being a stable servant to King Fu Chai, cleaning his toilets, even to the extent of volunteering to taste the feces of Fu Chai to determine his ailment, just to gain Fu Chai's trust. 3 years of utter humiliation eventually convinced Fu Chai that this rival king is no longer a peer competitor, and Goujian was then released from his servitude. Upon returning to what was left of the state of Yue, Goujian quickly instituted a series of reforms that reduces tax, encourage birth rates, and increase crop production. To remind himself of the humiliation he suffered in Wu, he opted to sleep alongside his subjects in a farm on straw or hay beds, do hard labor during the day while running his administration at night. He even tasted bile every day to remind himself of the bitter outcome of defeat. This is where the saying, 卧薪尝胆 comes from, to sleep on hay and to taste bile. He toiled for 10 years, eventually raising an army 40,000 strong and started his campaign against Wu in 482 BC. Goujian would lead 3 campaigns against Wu in the next decade, defeating Fu Chai in 473 BC, where Fu Chai eventually committed suicide when his request for peace negotiation was turned down by Goujian. The state of Wu was then annexed by Yue, ending the ancient bloodline of Wu that started with the uncle of King Wen of Zhou in 1150 BC. Now, coming back to the bird seal script inscription on this sword, while sinologists are familiar with this script as it was commonly used in the state of Chu, Wu, and Yue before unification of China, this script is nonetheless notoriously difficult to decipher. Eventually, the experts agree on the deciphering of these 8 words, and no, they don't say anything grandiose. Reading in modern Mandarin, it says, 越王勾践，自作用剑. Word for word translation says this: Yue King Goujian, self-made and used sword. Yes, this is that same Goujian, the king of Yue.